of the American Legion. They were a hit, an instant hit. And we started then to really get serious about putting a lot of sports on the air. And eventually we got to the place where we were doing sports virtually every weekend, either through the high school or Catawba College. That evolved into the base of WRDX. Whenever we were told in the 60s that we had to separate the programming for at least 12 hours a day on the FM station, we went to country music in 1967, and we still did a lot of sports. The FM was like a cheap way of having a telephone line to other stations. So if we originated sports, and we did a lot of origination, we could feed it to other stations and let them pay us because they didn't have anybody on their staff who could do play-by-play. I mentioned earlier that Salisbury was a forgiving town, and I can tell you a vivid story in my mind about Marty Brenneman. When Marty Brenneman learned that Ed Gaffney, who had been doing play-by-play, was leaving, he called me up from his job at Channel 8 in High Point and said, I want to talk to you about that job of doing play-by-play for you. I said, okay, come on over. And I explained to him that one, he didn't have a lot of background in play-by-play. He said, but I can do it. Well, we decided we'd take a risk. We'd take a chance on Marty Brenneman. And about 30 days into the Legion series, one of the advertisers called me one day and he said, I don't know where you got that guy, but you ought to give him a ticket to go home. I said, just be patient. Let's give him a few more weeks to see. I really wanted to get through the season. 30, 60 days later, he called me back and he said, you know, that guy's getting to be really good. Well, Marty Brenneman did do a good job in sports, and he helped build RDX. This was before we ever got to beach music. RDX was the second station, and while we were doing sports on the AM, we found that we had other sports we could carry on the FM station, including stock car racing, NASCAR. We also found out that we could cover other areas because the FM signal went a lot further than the AM signal. And so the next thing we found ourselves doing when Marty Brenneman left to go to the Norfolk, Virginia basketball team, the Virginia Squires, I think they were called. And then eventually he went to the Cincinnati Reds, and he's been there for probably 30 years and is a highly regarded sportscaster, probably one of the top 2 or 3 in the profession now. Well, people like Ed Gaffney, Marty Brenneman, Leo Morris, Bob Rathbun, others that went through our sports department went on to good jobs, and that was a sort of a feather in the cap of the people at WSTP and WRDX because it gave us some recognition. We were doing the network programming for Wake Forest University at one time. We did NC State for 1 year before Valvano got ill. We also did play-by-play for Duke, for Davidson. All the time we were doing Catawba. And we also did it for Appalachian State. And the final college we did play-by-play for was UNC Charlotte in their basketball. All of those games and all of those colleges and the people who were at the radio station doing the play-by-play, competent play-by-play, gave the station kind of a shine, a sheen, that this was a place where if you got a job, you had the potential of going somewhere. One day, a fellow who was doing the morning show on WSTP came in to my office and said, there's a media event that's being held at the Charlotte Motor Speedway. and I'd like to go. I thought about it for a second. I said, okay. His name is Doug Rice. Doug Rice had a knowledge of NASCAR over and above what the average announcer or sports play-by-play type knew about stock car racing. He went on the media tour, and that was it. But of course he covered NASCAR on the air. The next year he came in my office and said, the media tour is coming up, I'd like to go again. I said, okay, sure. Well, on this trip, Humpy Wheeler, who was the general manager of Charlotte Motor Speedway, had become aware that the questions that Doug Rice had asked at the media events, that those questions that he asked were the ones that wound up in the newspaper. Only the newspapers that wrote the stories deleted Rice as the questioner and implied that their own reporter had asked the question and that here was the answer. And that also happened on television. Well, Humpy Wheeler is not a dumb man. He knows what it was going on. He saw who was generating the interest. He made Doug Rice a proposition, which was about 2.5 to 3 times as much money as I could pay him. And so Doug Rice went to work for the Root and Smith organization, Charlotte Motor Speedway. And he's been there ever since. As a matter of fact, he runs their, I think it's Performance radio network now, which has several hundred stations broadcasting races. That's the kind of people that I found that Salisbury permitted to grow, because they made their mistakes, but they made them in a place where they didn't get threatened with loss of their job, they didn't lose face, they didn't lose faith in their skills or abilities, and they grew. And I'm sorry to say that today a lot of those places are no longer open in the various small communities because radio has changed so much. RDX was a country music station from 1967 until sometime around, I think it was about 1984, when we went to a high power station. We went to 100,000 watts with a tower that was 1,000 feet above average terrain, and because of the location of Salisbury at the population center of North Carolina, which has been Spencer for quite a while because of the growth in Charlotte and also to the east in Greensboro and Raleigh-Durham markets, Salisbury has been at the population center for maybe 20 years. It's near also the geographic center of the state, which is Asheboro. And so the signal that we could generate from our tower facility on Young's Mountain in western Rowan covered a huge number of people. When we finished building the FM station and went to 100,000 watts power in 1985, we went to a satellite, and we took our programming from a network, satellite music network, in Boulder, Colorado. And we were successful with it because we were able to operate off of a satellite. There was no need for additional announcers for big chunks of the day, and we thought we had found a way to make money. Well, within 90 days after our satellite move, we had competitors in Charlotte and competitors in the Greensboro, Winston-Salem market. And when I say competitors, I mean plural. 2 stations moved against us in Charlotte and 2 in the Greensboro, Winston-Salem area. So the market that we had was being splintered very rapidly because there was other satellite music operations. Sometime in 1986, we were still competing with the satellite, but we had a sun outage. And you know, a sun outage is whenever your receiver is lined up to your satellite and the satellite is directly lined up with your receiver and the sun. and you have what is called a sun outage. David Smiley was a part-time announcer, and he was working on Saturday afternoon and Sunday afternoon. And Phil Kerr, the program director at the time, was working with him about what music that he would play, because we'd have to go live for about 3 hours on Saturday afternoon and 2 hours and a half on Sunday. Well, what decided to do, at Smiley's suggestion, he says, I've got a lot of great music, and now would be the time to play it. It's called beach music. Well, I didn't know much about beach music. I don't know much about music, period. Phil Kerr was interested in what he had to say, but then he threw the ringer in. He said, I'll tell you what I'll do. If you'll let me take phone calls to the sales number, our 800 number, he says, I'll give you a printout on Monday morning where all the calls came from and what they wanted to hear or any response they have to the music. That's interesting. Kerr and I decided to give it a whirl. David Smiley went on the air live around 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon with beach music. Same thing on Sunday afternoon. On Monday morning, he laid a printout that he had generated after work on Sunday on Phil Kerr's desk of 103 telephone calls from 27 counties in 4 states. And I have to tell you that Phil Kerr and I were stunned by what we were looking at. Where did this come from? What in the world have we got here? Well, what we had was something called beach music. And we started thinking about beach music. What is this? Because we knew that we had our hands full with the satellite programming for the competition we had in both sides of the market. Well, it just so happened that a guy who had a little hamburger joint downtown was listening on both Saturday and on Sunday. And Kerr and I went down for hamburgers on Monday afternoon. And Hap Alexander, the owner of the grill, said he listened to the music, he enjoyed it, he loved that stuff. And as a matter of fact, he said, I got about 800 or 900 recordings of beach music. And Kerr said, you have, where are they? He said, upstairs over Hap's grill. Well, I eventually go back to the radio station. Phil Kerr goes upstairs, and whenever he finally comes to the radio station a couple hours later, he said, that guy's got a ton of that music. Well, before the week was out, we made Hap Alexander a proposition. If he gave us access to his beach music, the 800 or 900 recordings he had, we'd give him a 4-hour show on Sunday evening to promote Hap's Grill. Deal done. He said, that's great, I'll do it. Well, now we had some beach music, and we were thinking about what do we do about it. A few days later, Phil was in Charlotte, and he was at, I forget the name of the guy who owned the beach and can't think of his name. But anyway, there was a store in Charlotte that had some beach music. He had heard the program.
Chris Beachley, Wax Museum.
Chris Beachley, that's it. Yeah. Chris Beachley was the name of the guy. Thank you. Anyway, while he was there talking about sources of beach music, Chris Beachley told him that there weren't many. He didn't have much music in his store, and he didn't think he could get it because the record manufacturers no longer had it. Well, he met a guy there while he was there named John Hook.